Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we are continuing with Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter number 13, Nature, Enjoyer and Consciousness, in text number 27. Yavat sanjayate kinchit sattvam sthavara jangamam kshetrapna samyogad tadvidhi bharata rishabha. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. O chief of the Bharatas, know that whatever you see in existence, both the moving and the non-moving, is only a combination of the field of activities and the knower of the field. Om Agyana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmritamina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. So as we can see, Krishna is continuing his instructions to Arjuna about us, the living entities, the spirit soul, about himself, about material nature, and also about other living entities. So we can see from this verse that Krishna is repeating what he's already explained to us in chapter 2, which is the difference between body and a soul. So in the beginning of this chapter, we noticed that Krishna is explaining to Arjuna about the field of activities, which is this body, and also the knower of the field of activities, and that knower is us, the spirit soul. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains that the living entities and this material nature, we are all eternal. But the body is not eternal, it is temporary because it has a birth and it meets with death also, because body is made up of material elements. Whereas the spirit soul, Krishna says, Mamai Vamsha Jiva Loke, Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, that we, living entities, we are parts of Krishna, and that is why we are eternal. So what about this creation? So Srila Prabhupada explains that this creation is a combination of living entities and the material nature. Now, in this verse that we recited just now, Krishna is talking about both moving and non-moving living entities. Now, non-moving would be like trees, mountains, hills, etc. And as if you remember in our previous classes, we learned from this chapter about the different energies of Krishna. He has three energies: the internal, the external, and marginal. So where do we stand? We are considered to be the marginal energies. Now the question may arise, why? It's because we have the choice whether to elevate ourselves or to degrade ourselves. Now, in this process, association plays a very important role. If you remember, we advertised that today's topic is, what are the benefits of good association? So the spirit soul, that is us, we are the ones that give life to this body. Now, if you see the difference between a living and dead body, the dead body doesn't move at all. Why? Because the spirit soul has left that body. So there is no consciousness in that body. So we, because of us, the spirit soul, this body gets life and it grows. That is the reason. And Krishna, as he explained to us earlier also, that he's situated in our hearts, right? Sarvasya Chaham Hridi Sanivishto. He's there in the heart. And the purpose of him being in the heart with us is because he's the Supreme Lord. He's the controller. He's the witness. He's the sanctioner. So he is there to guide us how to break the cycle of birth and death. Now, if you remember, those of you who attended the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, which is especially chapter number 2, Krishna gives almost 22 verses 22 verses explaining the qualities of the spirit soul, that is us, that how there is a difference between body and soul. The soul, it cannot be burnt, it cannot be moistened, it cannot be drowned, it cannot be cut into pieces, because it is eternal. There's nothing that can destroy the spirit soul. So if somehow or the other we can grab onto this foundational instruction of Bhagavad Gita, which is, I am not this body, but I'm the spirit soul, then we will be able to really understand the Bhagavad Gita in the later chapters. And if we, are conscious of this fact that we are not this body, then we'll be able to progress even on the spiritual path. Otherwise, we will stay on the bodily concept, and then the thoughts will only be about how to satisfy this body, how to feed this body. But what about the soul? The spirit soul also needs some nutrition. And if you remember, we've talked about this before, that the food for the soul is chanting of the holy names of the Lord. This is how the soul remains enlivened. You see, people in general, they like to progress materially, and which is natural, and they should, right? So why not progress spiritually also? Most of you have been hearing these Bhagavad Gita classes for quite some time now. Some of you for a couple of months, some of you for a couple of years. So it behooves us, to take on to go on to the next step. Now, this body, as we know, just like we have an apartment on lease, similarly, this body is also on lease. And so since it doesn't belong to us, it belongs to Krishna, then we need to follow his laws. Just like when we live in a state, like I live in the state of Georgia, so I need to follow, if I am a good citizen of the state, I need to follow the state laws, because that is going to help me to live peacefully. So similarly, when we've received this body on lease, then it behooves us to follow the laws of the creator, that is Krishna. Just like, my car, the car that I drive, I need to use gas. But if one day I decide, no, I like diesel, so let me put some diesel in the car is going to break down. Why? Because it's not meant to work on diesel. So similarly, our bodies, they are meant to function in a particular way. For instance, the food that we eat, the environment in which we are, the association that we keep, the activities we perform, they all are very, very important. In fact, in chapter 17 of Bhagavad Gita, we will go in detail about this, how all these activities of ours, whether it is eating, sleeping, association, whatever it may be, our activities, they all fall into 3 different modes of material nature. So we'll learn more about that. But right now we need to understand using our intelligence to discriminate properly, discriminate everything. And that becomes possible when we have good association. I remember when my son was, getting into the first grade in school, this was in India, my husband and I, we had gone to, the parents were allowed on the first day, to come meet the teacher, etc. The boys, the kids, they get to meet each other, the students. So when I went there, I had not read Bhagavad Gita at that time, but I very clearly remember one instruction I gave to my son, and I told him, make sure you have good association. And I remember it so vividly. And I don't know why I said that, but this is something, it's common sense that, whatever association we keep, it's going to rub off on us. So for instance, Srila Prabhupada also says that if we start associating with someone who drinks a lot, or whatever, then even though we may not be, drinking alcohol, but the desire will develop because of that association. So if we have good association, like for instance, if we associate with like-minded people, say for instance, you want to learn Bhagavad Gita, then it would be nice to associate with those who are following Bhagavad Gita, because then we will learn from them, how to lead this human form of life. See, this human form is very, very rare. Out of 8.4 million species of life, only 400,000 different species of human beings are there. So it's very, very rare. And so since we have this human form, it's a form of responsibility. It's not meant to eat, sleep, and be merry. It is for higher consciousness. It is meant for us to become self-realized. And how do we do that? Bhagavad Gita teaches us how to do that. Now, from chapter 2 onwards, we learned Krishna explaining to us difference between body and soul. Then in chapter 3 and 5, he talked about karma, how we should perform our activities. And in chapter 12, the previous chapter, we learned about devotional service. Krishna gave us so many options, how to perform devotional service. First, he says, that you surrender unto me, you do everything for me. If you cannot do that, then okay, then you work for me. If you can't do that, then give up the results of your activities. If you cannot do that, then just take knowledge about me. So there are so many options for us. But the main thing to understand is that Krishna is the Supreme Lord who's situated in the heart, ready to guide us, right? In chapter 15, Krishna says, Sarvasya chaham riddhi sanivishto mataha smriti jnanam apohanam cha. He says, from me comes remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. So we choose what exactly do we want to do. We want to remember him, forget him, or we want to take on his knowledge. Let's take next verse, number 28, where Krishna says, one who sees the super soul accompanying the individual soul in all bodies, and who understands that neither the soul nor the super soul within the destructible body is ever destroyed, actually sees. So here Krishna is talking about someone who actually sees, who has a real positive vision. You see, he's again talking about super soul. Right from the beginning of this chapter, many verses Krishna has talked about soul and super soul. Soul is us, living entities, and super soul is Krishna himself. So he's saying that he travels in all bodies. It doesn't matter which body we take, whether it's human, animal, bird, aquatic, it doesn't matter. Krishna travels with us in all bodies. And that's what he's telling us in this verse. Again and again, he's stressing that, yes, I'm traveling. You are eternal. I am eternal. That means the spirit souls are eternal. Excuse me. And super soul also is eternal. Now, in this verse, he's saying, such a person actually sees, right? What does he mean? He actually sees. Now you may say, I can see you, I can see all the others in this room, I can see, things around me, but he's talking about actually sees. Who is that person? Someone who is in knowledge. What kind of knowledge? That the soul and the super soul, Krishna, they are eternal, but this body is destructible. If you remember in the verse, Krishna says destructible body, which means this body will come to an end. So with the help of knowledge, we understand who is eternal and who is not. Now, if this body is eternal, why is it that people are struggling so hard to satisfy the body? Why is so much importance given to the body and not to the soul? Remember, it is the soul within the body that gives life to this body. It is the soul in this body that gives consciousness to this body. And it is the soul that takes on another body. That means goes from one body to another. At the time of death, body is finished, but the soul continues on, right? Krishna says that after this life, the soul goes on into the next body. So in this verse, Krishna is talking about destructible body, which means we cannot keep this body forever. It is temporary. And it becomes easy to understand when we have good association. Now, what does it mean by good association? It means associations of devotees, those who are devoted to the Lord, those who are devoted to understanding the purpose of life, those who are devoted to understanding the Bhagavad Gita. You see, so Prabhupada says that good association will help one to see properly, right? Then a person will be able to see the difference between the body, the soul, and the super soul. You see, say, supposing I wear glasses which are tinted red, right? So, what will be the result? I will see everything red because I have worn glasses which are tinted red. Similarly, if we see through, instead of seeing through the tinted glasses, if we see through the Bhagavad Gita, the scripture, then we will be able to see the reality. Then we will be able to really understand that there is a body, there is a soul, there is a super soul, and we won't forget that. You see, when we see that, then it is to be considered that we are in knowledge. Then it is really possible, but it is not possible without good association. So good association means associating with spiritually inclined people, those who are interested in spirituality. Then they will be able to guide us to remove our ignorance. You know, many people say that there is no life after death. And that's their philosophy, that's their opinion, or that's their speculation. But according to the Bhagavad Gita, there is life after death. It's based on karma. If our activities are good, then the reactions are going to be good, which means if we are performing activities, whether they are good or bad, there has to be next life, there has to be next body. But we learned in chapter 3 of Bhagavad Gita that if we perform a karma, which means we follow the scriptures, but we do not desire to enjoy the fruits of our activities, then that is considered a karma, which means there are no, there are no reactions, which means there is no more birth. So based on our karma, we get the next body. Like I was explaining in last week's class also, that right now we are placing an order for our next body, right? Just like we place order on Amazon or, you know, eBay or whatever it may be online, we choose what we want. So based on our activities here right now, at present, we are preparing our future. But Bhagavad Gita is teaching us how to break this cycle of suffering, how to break the cycle of, birth, disease, old age, and death. One time I remember my husband and I, we went to a fair. We took our son. He was probably 10 or 12 years old. This was in India. And when we went to the fair, they wanted to go on what we call the Ferris wheel or the merry-go-round. And, that's very common in the fairs, that the wheel, the big wheel. And, so my son said, oh, it's so much fun. I want to go again and again and again. And after 5 times, he said, no more. That's it. I don't want anymore because now I'm dizzy and I feel like throwing up. This is what happens when we keep going on in the cycle of birth, disease, old age, death, birth, disease, old age, death. We keep on and on and on. One day we will get tired because this is like going round and round and round with nowhere to go, no destination. But Bhagavad Gita is teaching us how we can break the cycle of birth and death, so that we can go to a place where there is no birth, disease, old age, or death, which means there is permanent happiness in a spiritual body. We are spirit souls, we are spiritual. So we will be comfortable only in a spiritual body. Right now, the body that we have is made up of material elements. Now, a question may arise, that since the beginning of this chapter, Krishna is talking again and again and again about soul, super soul, soul, super soul. Why is he repeating so many times? Because it is important. Until and unless we understand this, we will not be able to go beyond the body. We will only be thinking about the body. Let's take the last verse for today, which is number 29. Krishna says, one who sees the super soul equally present everywhere in every living being does not degrade himself by his mind. Thus, he approaches the transcendental destination. Wow. This is another part of knowledge which we need to imbibe, which we need to really understand, that Krishna is equally present in all living entities. That means he is not partial. He does not favor one and doesn't favor another. No, he's equally present in all living entities. That includes animals, birds, aquatics, trees, every living entity, period. It's not that he's present only in human beings. So if he's present even in the animals, that means they also have a right to live, which means that we do not have a right to take their lives just for our sense gratification, because I want to eat meat, so I can kill the animal to enjoy. No, Krishna is present even in the heart of the animals. You know, there are 4 rules of a spirituality that are very important to follow. I'm not sure if I've talked about this before, but if I did, let's repeat it again. The 4, just like the house in which I'm living, it is standing on pillars, you see. Yes, there's a chat message from Stacy. I'm glad I'm vegetarian. Awesome. That's awesome. That's called a karma-free diet, karma-free life. Awesome. So they're just like the house is standing on pillars. If there are no pillars, the house is going to collapse. The roof, everything is just going to collapse. So similarly, the spiritual life also is dependent on 4 pillars. It can stay strong if the pillars are there. What are those 4 pillars? The 4 pillars. That's awesome, Rashik and Rishabh. We all are vegetarians. Very good. So these 4 pillars, spiritual pillars, are honesty, mercy, cleanliness, and austerity. These are the 4 pillars. Very, very important. Even if one of the pillars is missing, then it's going to be shaky. The spiritual life will be really shaky. And so, what are these pillars significant? What is the significance of these pillars? So there are 4 rules that we need to follow, which is no gambling, no meat eating, no illicit sex, and no intoxication. Now, these are connected to these 4 pillars. If we are gambling, we cannot be honest. Definitely cannot be honest. And the pillar of one spiritual pillar of one spiritual pillar will be gone if there is no honesty, if there is gambling. So no gambling. Then no meat eating, because if we eat meat, we cannot be merciful. So if we are eating meat, then our pillar of mercy also will be shaky. The third is cleanliness. So if we indulge in illicit sex, then definitely we cannot be clean. And finally, intoxication. If we take intoxication, then we cannot perform austerity. And austerity is very essential in spiritual life. One of the austerities that we need to follow is chanting the holy names of the Lord. So if these 4 pillars are strong in spirituality, then it'll become very easy to purify the heart and also to become self-realized. So this verse that we recited, 29, it's giving us a formula how not to degrade ourselves, you see. And the degradation comes because of the mind. The mind is the one where all the desires, come about, they take place, and the mind is the one that puts these desires into action. See, first come the thought, then that leads to action. So if the mind is under the control of the senses, then one starts getting degraded. See why? Because the mind needs to be controlled by intelligence. And intelligence will control the mind only when intelligence is sharpened with the sword of knowledge. This is what Krishna tells Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. So for us to be able to control the mind, there is a very great need of constant practice and detachment. When there is attachment to Krishna, automatically there will be detachment from sense gratification. We won't have to try hard. So how to control the mind? The mind can be easily controlled when we chant the holy names on a daily basis, because it's only the mind that can help us to elevate ourselves or to degrade ourselves. So what will be the result? The result will be permanent happiness and peace of mind. And so that is why in every class we chant after the class is over. Of course, I'm sorry, I forgot last Wednesday, but we'll definitely chant today after the class. But chanting is what is going to help us to even understand the Bhagavad Gita. So here, Krishna is trying to explain to us the difference between body and soul. He's also talking about the spirit soul and super soul that are eternal, but the body is temporary. And he's explaining to us how we should not degrade ourselves by, our destructive mentality. He's explaining to us that this body is destructible, right? So if we can somehow or the other elevate our consciousness to Krishna consciousness, then what will happen? The mind will also come under control. You see, mind is like a child. It needs to be trained. It needs to be disciplined. And that will become possible when we have good association. So the benefit of good association is that we will get knowledge. We will understand difference between body and soul. We will understand what is the goal of life. We will understand why am I suffering. We will understand how to break the cycle of suffering, and we will understand the process that is given to us in Bhagavad Gita. So 3 things are very important: chanting every day, hearing, and associating with devotees. So what we will do is, if you don't mind, we can chant. I know I have posted this before in chat, but I will do that again once more. And you can see that at the bottom is the Maha Mantra that we will chant. So let's chant. Please chant with me the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. We'll just chant for a little while just to get the hang of it. And I hope you will continue to chant at home on the other days also. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare. So you see, we chanted 10 times, but it would be nice if y'all can chant at least 108 times, at least 108 times every day, which is one round. And it takes about 10 minutes, not more than that. So I'm going to stop here and see if